glad everybody could be here today. I am the special treat for the lesson this morning, and when I say that, I don't mean it's going to be a treat, but what I'm up here to do today is to help you appreciate Pat and all that he does. So I'm going to give it the best effort. I don't know how John can do better than myself, but if you take anything from this lesson, take the fact that you missed Pat and Judy when they're gone on vacation, and I tried my best, but you'll definitely miss him before my lesson's over today. As I was preparing for the lesson, I was trying to come up with different topics and things I thought would be good. And so many times, just like today, when I go through looking at my old lessons that I've done, I tend to think back of things that I need to work on. A lot of times you study, you work, you know your weaknesses. And one of the things I want to talk about today is conflicts and how we deal with those conflicts. When we have confrontation, in our personal lives as well as in our spiritual lives. So where are some of the places we have conflicts at? I'll ask participation from the audience.
Work.
Excellent.
Family. Wives.
Family? I'm sorry.
It doesn't mean that.
We'll stick with family. We will have conflicts with our family. We have conflicts at work. Church. Our spiritual lives with the people we deal with. Sometimes we have conflicts with ourselves. Exactly. That's a good example right there. One of the things I have been doing a lot of here recently is reflection. As things come up, as topics come up, I tend to do a lot of self-study. Hey, why do I feel the way I feel? Am I right? Am I biblically correct? And going through and looking at the Word. So we have these conflicts throughout our lives in pretty much every avenue that we have. So how do we want to deal with these conflicts? How do we deal with these confrontations? Sometimes we have limiting factors. When you're at work, you're very limited in what you can do. We always hear the HR thing, you have to be on your best behavior. Sometimes in our family lives, we'll hear people talk about, well, your blood relative. They're my blood kin. That, maybe you'll give them a little slack in certain areas because you have that relationship with them. In our Christian life, same's true. You say, hey, we're blood kin. We're not necessarily of biological kinship, but we're all under the blood of Christ. So just some things to think about. So we just talked about we all do have conflicts. How many of us are too quick or act on those confrontations too quickly? Every hand should be raised. We're all human. That's the biggest problem with most of our conflicts. Most of our conflicts are not biblically based or factually based, if we're talking in our personal lives. It tends to be more of emotions and the problems we have as humans and our shortfalls. So keep that in mind as we go throughout the study today. What about our willingness to address issues in our lives and to confront somebody? Do we confront them too quickly and let our human emotions
Or not at
get
all.
involved? Or not at all? And that's actually where I want to focus today, because I'm what you would refer to as a peacekeeper. I tend to avoid conflict at all costs. In high school, when you'd have the little fist fights or whatever you want to call them, everybody would run to the fight. They all wanted to be in the center of the action. I was the person that wanted to run away from all that. I didn't want to be involved in any of the conflict. Is that the right thing to do? Well, at times, probably so. But if we have conflicts that need to be addressed or confrontations that need to take place spiritually, we have an obligation. If you will, turn your Bibles to Galatians chapter 1, verses 6 through 10. Galatians chapter 1, verses 6 through 10. And I got two different versions here. I'm going to read this version here. Sorry. Galatians chapter 1, verses 6 through 10. I am astonished that you are so quickly discerning the one who called you to live by the grace of Christ, and turning to a different gospel, which is really no gospel at all. Evidently, some people are throwing you into confusion and trying to pervert the gospel of Christ. But even if the angels in heaven should preach the gospel other than the one preached to you, let them be under God's curse. As we have already said, so now I say again, if anybody is preaching to you a gospel other than what you have accepted, let them be under God's curse. Let's pay close attention here in verse 10. I am now trying to win the approval of human beings.
It says, am I now? And that's different.
Correct. Am I now? It didn't sound right to me. I read it again. I read it the exact same way the second time. Thank you for that correction. I'll bring up another point here in a second. Thank you, Joel. Am I now trying to win the approval of human beings or God, or am I trying to please people? If we are still trying to please people, I would not be a servant of Christ. So it's a major problem for me not to address issues as I see those issues. Is that correct? Did everybody agree with that?
I agree.
One thing that Joel just brought up, and I will mention now, I'm not a very learned person. If I say anything here today that doesn't sound right or doesn't sound correct, please question me on it, just as Joel did.
I just happen to be reading the same version that you were. I said, the way you read it, it gives a completely different...
Words matter. And I actually had a section in here that got cut out talking about the importance of words and how I'm not a learned person.
Thomas Jefferson, if you didn't like it, we just cut it out.
That's right.
Exactly. And it would just take the whole meaning away from it, wouldn't it?
It makes no difference if you learn it or not. You're still human.
Exactly. But we do need to be careful with that. So please, if you have any issues, if it's something that needs to be taken off to the side, please talk to me after. And if it's something that needs to be addressed right away, so I will head off on the straight path, bring it up to me right then and there. So what is confrontation? So I did a Google search and got up some meanings, and I was looking, I tend to go back and look at, Webster and different things like that. And I hate bringing it up, other than the fact that it was so different than what I kind of had in my mind. I think this confrontation is something can be negative in nature, but I didn't think of it as that bad. Okay, you're providing correction. But anyway, let me tell you what Webster had to say. It is a hostile or argumentative meeting or situation between opposing parties. That sounds pretty drastic, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Hostile and argumentative. We shouldn't be hostile. We shouldn't be argumentative. But we have confrontations. I actually went through and looked up and was trying to find some different synonyms for confrontation. And to be honest, it didn't sound any better when I was looking for an alternate word to use here. Competition, contest, face-off, grapple, dogfight, conflict, combat, match, struggle, tug of war, and there's a bunch more, but you kind of get the impression. It actually sounds really bad. Do you believe that's the biblical definition of confrontation? Huh? I think we may sometime, I don't think that's how we mean it, but I think we need to be careful as Christians when we have a confrontation with somebody. How should our confrontations with others be?
Well, if you
With love.
Love, that's a good one.
If you look at Luke, Jesus was least friendly, let's say, with his confrontations in Luke. I mean, he never capitulated and he never ignored a situation that depicted an evil. But he wasn't always very friendly about it.
He was stern.
He was stern, and sometimes, name calling, some people they're vipers and stuff. I mean,
Yeah.
it was just
Well, technically they were.
yeah, I mean, he was less friendly. He wasn't, I don't know, he was rude, I mean, Jesus was.
I would say he was more stern than rude.
Well,
I think he was to the point.
he was to the point, and he was,
When he called the leaders snakes, vipers, you bunch of snakes?
Well, one of my problems, personal problems, is I like to sugarcoat things. You know, I have an issue. Well, you know, Joel, I haven't really liked the way you said that or you did this. You know, I'll beat around the bush all day long trying to bring up a point. Now, I'm doing it out of love, but that may not necessarily be the correct path either, is it? Mike, you were getting ready to say something?
No, I just said he said that's a hypocrite. You know, talking about how Jesus responded to some of these. Jesus told the truth
Yeah, he was very pointed.
and came to do the will of the Father. So yeah, I told him. So.
Okay. Anything else? Anybody else have anything they'd like to add there?
Jesus knew what was in everybody's heart. He knew why these people were doing what they did or said what they said. You know, he knew that they were indeed vipers. You know, but I don't know that you're a viper. I just know that this one action that you did or this one event that we were confronting each other on, you know, we were at odds. I don't know why you do what you do. I just saw that one. So we have to be very careful on judging people based on one event. Like we can't say, oh, she's always mean to me, or she never talks to me, or but it was a one thing. You don't know why. You know, maybe I frighten you and you don't speak to me.
Good point.
You know, these things. I think we need to be, you know, you talk about doing things immediately. Perhaps we need to take a moment and think, like, well, I wonder why she's doing that. Perhaps I should ask, why don't you ever talk to me? She says, well, you're very loud. I prefer not to be, you know, these things. But
Right.
Jesus knew, so he could confront people in a certain way. And we probably need to do like you, sort of, you know, maybe hem a little bit, maybe not so much hawing, but yeah, I mean,
It takes a little bit of both.
yeah.
I think it's also hard for us as humans to try to correct other people knowing that we're far from perfect ourselves. Jesus didn't have that problem. Jesus was perfect. So, you know, it's not going to be hard for me if I am perfect to tell you you're imperfect.
Well, sometimes the people that think they're perfect are a lot more willing to say things
a lot
than
of times
maybe
it's
they should.
hard for us to go to somebody to try to correct, even if we're doing it with good intentions and a pure heart,
Right.
because we know things that we've done.
You know, if you get the plank in my eye, I got a 6x6 stuck up there.
What I was going to say was that it just shows you there's not always one way to address something. He read the room. He knew each of those situations he chose specifically to address it in certain ways, whether it's answering legal accusations in certain ways, addressing very difficult topics with parables instead of being very specific, overturning tables because they were doing something right then that was wrong. They took immediate action versus just talking to somebody who's a sinner when he was addressing that other people was going to basically try to stone the woman. And he addressed everything in different ways in different settings. And it shows you that, you know, it's not a one-size-fits-all thing.
It is not a one-size-fits-all. We're all human. We all have different personalities. As Robin was saying, as far as communication, we need to listen. We need to take a step back. You need to understand where that person's coming from. I'll share a story on John and myself this past week, and it was very minor. I'm going to make more out of it than it was. You say things, and people hear it differently. Or this is exemplified in emails. I hate written communication. I'm not very good at it, you know. But when you send text or you send emails, you know, there's plenty of comedian skits out there that the person's saying this thing, and you hear them talking over there, and they're being all nice and friendly, and the person's reading on the other end. It's like, I can't believe he said that about me. And whether that's written communication, sometimes we make, you know, we're joking, we're kidding, we make a little remark. People take it differently. They take it not in the context you may have meant it to be a friendly gesture or a friendly comment, and they may be offended by it. And are they wrong? Are you wrong? Maybe you're both wrong. Who knows? But you need to be, we as Christians need to be understanding of that and try to address those issues early on before those issues boil over into something bigger, and just try to use good communications to head any problems off like that. The issue I was going to share kind of had last week. Jody's asking, okay, John's going to do one, you're going to do the other. I thought I was going to do the sermon today, and John was going to teach. And then Jody came up and was like, well, John wants to do the sermon, and you can do the lesson. I was like, well, no, I don't want to do, just picking with Jody. And I was just picking, and I thought we were all, but John texted me later on. He's like, well, you are good just doing the lesson, right? You're doing the sermon. But that's good communication. And I meant nothing by it. I kind of chuckled. I was like, no, I was just kidding, I meant absolutely nothing by it. But it's little things like that. If we're not careful, if we don't head them off, we'll turn into bigger things.
Rich, I can share a quick story too that happened recently with when we was addressing the elders of Rocky Mount, and Pat came up with a script, and then you and I were like, man, that's rough. And then when
we didn't like it at all, we thought it was
because we read his draft via email, but yet when he actually read it and he had his tone and his body language, we were like, wow, it just meant it was completely, it had a completely
it sounded a little
meaning.
Crude, a little rough, a little,
yeah,
it had aspects about it when you just read it, but to hear him, to hear him read the letter, you could hear the love.
right.
And I think that was our point. It's like, this feels a little harsh. I'm not feeling the love in it. But when he read it, it sounded beautiful.
Yeah.
That's a much better example than what I came up with. I was trying to make more out of something than what it was. So the Bible gives us lots of examples. We've talked about a few here. I'd like to bring up one in 2 Samuel 12. How do y'all feel about reading? I know some people like reading, some don't.
What verse you got?
It's going to be 2 Samuel chapter 12. Let's start in verse 1. And we want to split it about in half instead of, if you want to do 1 through 5, and then maybe John, you carry on to 7 through 10 maybe?
Through 10?
Yeah, 7 through 10.
And the Lord sent Nathan unto David, and he came unto him, and said unto him, there were two men in one city, the one rich and the other poor. The rich man had exceeding many flocks and herds, but the poor man had nothing, save one little ewe lamb, which he had bought and nourished up. And it grew up together with him and with his children. It did eat of his own meat, and drank of his own cup, and lay in his bosom, and was unto him as a daughter. And there came a traveler unto the rich man, and spared to take of his own flock and of his own herd, to dress it with a wayfaring man that was to come unto him. But took the poor man's lamb, and dressed it for the man that was come unto him. And David's anger was greatly kindled against the man. And he said unto Nathan, as the Lord liveth, the man that hath done this thing shall surely die.
And he shall restore fourfold the lamb, because he did this thing, and because he had no pity. Then Nathan said to David, you are the man. Thus says the Lord God of Israel, I anointed you king over Israel, and I delivered you from the hand of Saul. I gave you your master's house and your master's wives into your keeping, and gave you the house of Israel and Judah. And if that had been too little, I also would have given you much more. Why have you despised the commandment of the Lord to do evil in his sight? You have killed Uriah the Hittite with the sword. You have taken his wife to be your wife, and have killed him with the sword of the people of Ammon. Now therefore the sword shall never depart from your house, because you have despised me, and have taken the wife of Uriah the Hittite to be your wife.
Thank you, John. Awesome example. You read in the first half there where Teresa was reading how good of an example he gave, how he went to somebody who he had an issue with and turned it into a story. I don't know about y'all, you think of, you have conflicts or you want to confront somebody, maybe your boss is doing something at work that you don't agree with, you don't like, you think it should be addressed. How hard is that? I would say it's pretty hard because you're, risking being fired. You know, if you have a confrontation with family, you risk having them turn away from you and not want to associate with you anymore. That's a pretty big risk. Here's the king of Israel. How many of us want to go in front of the king and bring up an issue with him? I know I wasn't. Wayne's been talking, we've been studying some of the prophets this past Wednesday night, talking about, the messenger. Well, here Nathan's just the messenger. Y'all ever heard the saying, don't kill the messenger? Well, that's kind of treading on dangerous ground right there when you talk about the king. Are we willing to put our personal well-being to the side to be able to try to address an issue or to confront somebody that we think is doing wrong? Not always. I know personally me, and I've already admitted to it, I'm weak. I tend to try to avoid the conflict. It's sad. It's wrong. It's something I need to work on in my daily life, in my Christian walk of life. But am I helping my brother if he has an issue and I refuse to take it to him? Not doing him any good, I'm not doing me any good.
I think it should be a lot of prayer before going into kind of conversation.
Absolutely. A lot of prayer, a lot of self-reflection, a lot of study. For somebody like me who's not well-spoken, I need to have a well-thought-out plan.
I think we all should.
How are you going to bring up this issue to them? Because how do we deal with issues when somebody brings something up to us? I wasn't going to get into it quite this early, but depending on time and how far I'll come back to some of the other examples, let's go ahead and, if I bring an issue to you, what's your first knee-jerk reaction?
We tend to be quick to speak.
Quick to speak?
Probably defensive.
Defensive. That's the word I want to get into. I'm going to share a story. 4 weeks ago, I got a speeding ticket on the way to Lynchburg going to work.
Oh, man.
I got
probably guilty.
I got a dash cam in my car that records my speed and everything around me, audio, all that. Cop got behind me, pulled me over right there in Owens Market, and I didn't even get a biscuit. He walks up to the car. It was kind of strange to me because he gave this presence that he was a new police officer, but he seemed older than myself, which kind of threw me off. But nevertheless, we went through the motions. He got my driver's license. He went back to the car. It took him forever and a day. At some point in there, another officer was sitting in his passenger seat, got out and did something, and got back in the car. And I'm like, that's strange. Usually state troopers don't ride around with two people in the car. Nevertheless, he came up, wrote me my ticket. We had some other light discussions. I was polite to him. He was polite to me. He did everything right in the sight of how a transaction like that should take place. And if you know me, I'll talk to things. I respect the position of police, and I respect their authority as a position. I'm not necessarily keen. I think a lot of police officers don't fill those shoes very well. I'll say it that way. So I have some issues with that, not necessarily the authority of the position, but just how some of the people do things like that. But he did everything perfect. I had nothing to fuss about. What's my first knee-jerk reaction? I'm mad. I'm mad as a hornet. I get in my car and I head on down the road and I go to work. I couldn't wait because I was a little late for work then. I couldn't do it, but I went out there at lunchtime. I downloaded that dash cam off my car. I was like, I want to see how fast I was going. He said I was doing 75 and a 60. I said, I knew I was passing some cars there, but he's wrong. And then I was like, well, maybe I was doing something. I didn't even look at the spot. What if I was doing 80? I was already scheming of things to say in court to the judge to try to get out of this ticket. I kid you not, and it sounds so silly here when I was talking about this. I was like, what if I was doing 80 and I got proof of it on my dash cam? I'm going to roll into court and say, Your Honor, you can't trust this guy. He's a liar. I was doing 80, not 75. That thought crossed my mind. Is that a good Christian thought? No, not at all. But that's our human nature. That's what we have to be careful with. We have to think things out, calm down, let the emotions subside. Nevertheless, I actually did request the dash cam and the body cam just to watch it. That was pretty humorous. But nevertheless, he did everything perfectly.
So what'd your video prove?
My video proved absolutely nothing other than I was wrong, he was right. And his dash cam video also proved that. There was some funny commentation going on in the background between them and, things going on that, if you're interested, I will show it to you.
So you definitely were going at least 75.
My dash cam said I was doing exactly 70. I've been doing 70 the whole way to Lynchburg, and that's our human nature. We like to test the limits. But I've been doing 70 the whole way to Lynchburg, and I just had got the passing lane just in time to pass the cop. Doing 75.
Did he give you for reckless driving?
No, it wasn't 20 over, so. And it wasn't over 80, so. And he was nice and he was polite, but that, I was getting corrected. I was in the wrong. He was correcting me. And my knee-jerk reaction as a human is to get mad, fuss about it, scheme up what. And that's terrible. We shouldn't be that way. But hopefully, if somebody comes to you with correction, and I honestly believe now, and, I'd have to think about it. It depends on the situation. I think maybe you should go to somebody and say, hey, I have an issue. This is the issue. I want you to think about it. Let me think about it. And let's get together in a day or two and let the emotions subside. I think that would probably be a much better way to handle certain things, because even the simplest things, even knowing that, I knew I was in the wrong and I still got mad about it. So.
Well, we are supposed to provoke one another with love.
Correct.
And what does that really mean? And then there's scriptures that tell us, cowardly, I like to use the term cowardly conduct. If you're not willing to confront somebody that needs confronted, it's wrong to be a coward. And then the scriptures also tell us, when we're reconciling unreconcilable differences, it's important. If we can't reconcile those differences, especially to a brother or sister in Christ, our worship is in vain. And it's important to do that. In times I don't do it, you can ask this woman right here, I toss and turn and lose sleep all night long, worrying about not confronting someone at work or at church.
But our example here, Nathan knew what David did. And Nathan didn't go and just point fingers at David and look what you've done.
He probably lost his head.
Yeah, but he didn't. He said, hey, let me give you this a little example. So what do you think I should do? It's almost like with Solomon and the baby. Which one, which is the mother? So the one who did things for love. Let the lady have the baby. But yeah, Nathan is just like, and that's what we should do. Hey, if somebody's doing this, what do you think we should do?
Absolutely.
And, maybe it works at work too. It's been a long time since I've been.
Well, that shows wisdom on the other side where we're talking about, me and my speeding ticket. Where, I need to just calm down, relax, think about it thoughtfully. The same's true. When somebody wrongs you, they may have wronged you. They may be you may be correct in bringing this issue to them, but how do you bring it?
Yeah.
You did this to me. How dare you, or your human emotions, that all that has to be removed. It has to be.
I'm not as smart as Nathan to think of a story like that.
It's pretty impressive when you think about it.
Well, he also had a little time to work it up.
Well, I think the Lord was working with him.
Well, he had Nathan had God's authority to do this.
Right.
He says, you are the man. Thus says the Lord God of Israel.
Right.
All he's bringing is, like you said, the message. This is what God is saying to David. And David had two different choices. David could have said, well, I'm putting you to death, or I'm going to exile you. You're not going to speak for God anymore. But, back down in 13, David says to Nathan, I have sinned against the Lord. That's the proper attitude. When something is brought to us, I've sinned. We have to suffer the consequences.
And that's a hard step to take.
It's a hard step to take. But that's the example we learned, from this incident.
Mm-hmm.
And this is, he had somebody killed. We're not talking about a speeding ticket. Right. We're talking about he had somebody killed.
This is
and took his life. And then you see the whole list of all things that God had given. Did he forget? Well, I think it's human nature. Sometimes we do forget how much God has blessed us and how patient God is with us. And we need to, have that same patience with each other.
I mean, how many of us could have done what Nathan did?
I want to confront somebody, we need to pray first mainly. Because we have to go into it realizing that if we are right and they are wrong, they're not looking at it that way. They really do usually think they are right.
Most likely.
We can't go in guns a-blazing and saying you're wrong and that's that. We have to try to get them to understand why they're wrong.
At least initially, anyway. Later on, there could be some times where you got to be a little more point blank, but at least initially, you know, like we said, we're doing
You
that.
put them in the corner before you give them the whipping.
Exactly.
Need to be long-suffering, Justice Price. Just think how long-suffering he is towards us in our life. That's the way we should treat other people.
Let's look at another example. I'm going to skip that for now. Let's go to Matthew chapter 18. We're going to be looking at verses 15 through 17. Mike, would you mind reading that?
What was that again?
Matthew chapter 18, verses 15 through 17.
Moreover, if your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault between you and him alone. If he hears you, you have gained your brother. But if he will not hear, take with you one or two more, that by the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses every word may be established. And if he refuses to hear them, tell it to the church. But if he refuses even to hear the church, let him be to you like a heathen and a tax collector.
So here we see, you know, if your brother and sister sin, if you have a conflict may not be necessarily sin, but you should take that issue before it becomes sin. Or if it is sin, you take it to them individually. That's one-on-one. That, you know, I think we have a problem, especially me. I don't want to have conflict. You know, okay, Dwayne, you did something wrong. Well, I become, you did that too. Like, you think that's right? You did this to me. You know what? Oh, no. Don't bring it up with anyone else. Go talk to Dwayne about it.
I will say, from what you said earlier, that if anyone does have a problem with me, don't tell me you want to have a meeting in 2 days, because I'll have anxiety and stress about the 2 days over what you're going to say. I want to talk about it now, or at least know what it is.
Yeah.
So.
Well, all my flaws and my shortcomings, I will say I feel like I do a pretty good job. You know, I've had minor issues, trust me, minor, but it was just one of those things, you know, that I've gone to men and just said, hey, this kind of rubbed me the wrong way. And it wasn't so much that I was giving them correction, it's just like, hey, you said something, and I kind of took it this way. Oh, well, that's the way I meant it, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with Dwayne. You got a problem with anybody, you know, come tell me right then, so if you ask me 2 or 3 days later, older you get, I'm not gonna remember.
We all do
What
that.
talking about?
Yep. That's a good point.
But that's funny because it's different for different people with different communication styles. Because I'm the opposite, and it's funny because in that early years of our marriage, I have to be alone and rethink it and think it from their perspective. Sometimes I need to pray for that person, and before I'm ready to talk about something that was hurtful, because I will say something hateful and I know I will. And I don't want to do that, so I want to take some time to think about,
Let those
emotions subside somewhat, and then talk. So it's funny because he's banging on the bathroom door, and I'm like, leave me alone. So like, you have to, it's good if you can understand the person and try to care about their feelings and what their perspective is. If you can think it through a little bit before you approach them. And also, anything you say that's in anger, their defense mechanism will be triggered and they won't hear you. They won't be able to hear your message if you're saying something to them out of anger.
Absolutely.
So if you can diffuse your
Because even don't do it out of anger, it's still the first knee-jerk reaction.
Right.
Defense mechanism.
Right. So if you can think about Nathan, he he gave him a story that was completely about somebody else or something else that he was not, his defense mechanism wasn't triggered at all. So he could understand the sin. He could see it clearly. So yeah, it helps if you can not let somebody let something fester a long time, but still spend some time to, diffuse your emotions before you go to them.
I had years and years of experience of writing emails in the government. And something I've learned is never send a constructive email when you're mad.
Absolutely not.
Always, you might construct it and leave it in draft mode, go home, cool down, come back the next morning and reread it, and then you might be ready to rephrase it.
Well, I send emails when I'm happy and people think I'm yelling at them, so maybe I don't know, maybe I don't want to take your advice, maybe I want to try it the other way, maybe if I'm mad at them, they'll think I'm happy.
Even as a parent, when I used to get really mad at something one of the adults did, I would always send them to the room. I said, "You're going to get a whipping when I calm down," because I knew better than to whip them right then, because then I'd been in jail.
Oh, yeah.
It's better to calm down in any situation before you actually react.
Well, we're about out of time. If you want to jot down some notes, two other examples I wanted to go over, but we're not going to have time today. One is in Luke chapter 11, 37 through 54, where Jesus is criticizing the religious leaders, where he goes to the Pharisees. And another example, and I really want to do this one, was Galatians chapter 2, verses 11 through 21, where Paul confronts Peter. And most of us are familiar with it, but, as far as fellowshipping with other Jews and the Gentiles, some of the examples there, and how he was able to confront him and talk to him at a personal level. I think I like that Paul confronts Peter because that seems more relevant to me as fellow Christians.
I'm sure Pat would let you continue this lesson, because you failed at this one. Because you said that we wish Pat was here and you weren't, and you lied.
Well, I was going to say, here's one more example of, you can't fault Pat because Pat runs over a lot of times or doesn't get to where he wants. And it's not Pat's fault, it happens to all of us. So. Well, I do appreciate everybody's input to it. Yeah, I'm not a full-time minister, but I do enjoy studying the Word, and I do enjoy trying to bring, this is an issue I have. Hopefully some of the things we talked about today and shared, you can apply to your life. I hope as we continue on in this congregation, as we work with others, we're humans, we all have our shortfalls, but, we can do everything out of love, compassion, but also be stern. Not to be afraid of confrontation in the sense of positive confrontation, in the sense of ensuring that Jesus' will is being done. Not our will, not our likes, not our dislikes, not our pet peeves or whatever you want to call it, but, the Lord's will, Jesus' will is being done in the congregation. And if something seems not quite right, be willing to go talk to somebody before that festers and becomes a problem and becomes more of an issue. So hopefully that's what you took from the lesson today, because that's what I was trying to get from the lesson today. But if I said anything wrong, Joel, thank you. Come and tell me. We will have correction today.
Thank you, Richard.
Very well.
Number 103. Number 103.